Cowboy, I came to marry you. I'm the little Apache girl you saved 20 years ago. The wind had picked up suddenly that afternoon, shaking the dry branches of the trees and carrying a bitter chill across the open plains of Texas. Gray clouds rolled over the horizon, and the first heavy drops of rain began to fall, soaking the dusty ground in minutes. On the wide, empty stretch of land, a young cowboy named Daniel was guiding his herd back toward the barn. He had grown up on this land, knowing every hill, every stream, and every hidden path. Life on the ranch was hard, but it was honest, and Daniel had always believed in helping others, no matter the cost. As he moved the cattle, a sudden sound caught his attention, a faint, terrified cry carried by the wind. At first he thought it might be the wind itself, or one of the animals in distress, but the sound persisted. He squinted through the rain, trying to make out its source. His heart skipped a beat when he saw a small figure struggling near the riverbank that cut across the edge of his property. A young girl, no more than 8 years old, was clutching the edge of a fallen log, her small feet slipping in the mud as the river water churned dangerously close. Without hesitation, Daniel left the cattle and ran toward the river. His boots sank into the wet soil, and the rain soaked him within seconds, but he didn't care. All he could think about was getting to the child before it was too late. The river was swollen from the storm, and the currents looked strong enough to sweep her away in an instant. He called out to her, his voice strong but calm. "Hold on! I'm coming!" The girl's eyes widened in fear as she looked at him. Her dark hair was plastered to her face, and her small hands trembled as she clung to the log. She opened her mouth to scream, but the sound was lost in the roar of the water and the wind. Daniel carefully moved closer, keeping his own footing against the slippery mud. He could feel the cold water rising higher as he reached her, and a moment of panic gripped him when he realized how fast the river was moving. He stretched out his arms, careful not to startle her, and said gently, "It's okay. I've got you. Just trust me, and I'll get you out of here." The girl hesitated, fear written across her small face, but something in Daniel's calm voice seemed to reach her. Slowly, she let go of the log enough for him to grab her hand.
The river's pull was strong, and for a few terrifying moments, it seemed like the current might win.
Daniel anchored himself to a sturdy branch, pulling with all his strength. Finally, inch by inch, he managed to drag her to the riverbank, collapsing onto the muddy ground with her in his arms. They were both soaked to the bone, shivering from the cold, but alive. The girl looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes. She didn't speak at first, only trembling and clinging to his jacket. Daniel held her close, wrapping his arms around her and whispering, "You're safe now." Breath. "You're safe." He could see the relief slowly replacing the fear in her eyes. He gently helped her to her feet, brushing the mud from her small boots.
"Do you know your family?" he asked.
She shook her head, her lips quivering.
I think so," she said softly.
Her voice was almost lost in the rain, but Daniel heard it clearly. He smiled reassuringly.
"Don't worry. We'll get you home."
As they walked back toward the road, Daniel noticed how small and fragile she looked against the vastness of the plains.
He kept a protective arm around her shoulders, guiding her through the mud and puddles. The rain continued to fall, but somehow it didn't feel as frightening anymore. With every step, the girl's trust in him seemed to grow, and he felt a sense of responsibility stronger than anything he had ever known. Finally, after what felt like hours but was only minutes, they reached the small cabin where the girl lived. Her family rushed out drenched and worried, their faces pale with fear. The girl's mother ran to her, scooping her up into her arms and crying tears of relief. Daniel stood back, letting them reunite, a quiet smile on his face. The little girl looked back at him over her mother's shoulder, her eyes shining. She mouthed the small, shy, "Thank you," and Daniel nodded, feeling a warmth in his chest he hadn't expected. Even after the storm had passed, Daniel couldn't stop thinking about her. Her bravery, even in fear, and the way she had trusted him despite everything struck a chord deep inside him. He continued with his chores, but the memory of her small hand in his lingered. That single act of courage, both hers and his, had created a bond neither of them could yet understand. Days turned into weeks, and the story of the rescue spread through the small town. Neighbors and friends praised Daniel for his bravery, but he brushed off the attention. Anyone would have done the same, he told them. Yet privately he found himself hoping to see the little girl again, curious about how she was coping after the frightening experience. For the girl, the memory of that day stayed with her as well. She often thought about the cowboy who had saved her life, wondering what he was like outside that moment. She remembered the way he had spoken to her, his calm voice cutting through the fear, and the way he had held her so she felt safe even when the world seemed terrifying. In her mind, he became a symbol of safety, kindness, and courage, qualities she would carry with her for the rest of her life. Life gradually returned to normal. Daniel resumed his work on the ranch, tending to his animals and fields, and the girl continued her childhood, though she was more cautious and aware of the dangers around her. Yet, in the quiet moments, both of them would remember that day. The storm, the river, the fear, and the unexpected connection between them. Years later, when she was grown, the girl would tell friends and family about the cowboy who had saved her, though she never imagined she would see him again. And Daniel, though he moved on with his life, never forgot the little girl with wide, scared eyes who had touched his heart so deeply. It was a moment that would define both of them, a moment where courage and kindness met in the midst of a storm, leaving an imprint that time could not erase. That first encounter was not just a rescue, it was the beginning of a story neither of them could yet understand, a story of trust, protection, and an unspoken connection that would endure for years, waiting for the right moment to be discovered again. The plains of Texas were wide and empty, but in that vastness, two lives had intersected in a way that would change both forever. And though they did not know it then, that single act of bravery, the cowboy saving the little Apache girl from the raging river, would echo through the decades. It would become the foundation of a bond so strong that nothing could break it, not even time itself. The memory of that stormy day, the fear, the relief, and the quiet gratitude would remain alive in both their hearts, waiting for the moment when their paths would cross again in a way neither could have imagined.
Years passed quietly on the wide plains of Texas.
The storm that had brought fear and chaos long ago became a distant memory for most, but for the little Apache girl and the cowboy who had saved her, that day lingered in their hearts in ways neither fully understood.
The girl, whose name was Ayana, grew older with her family in a small but warm home on the edge of the plains.
She remembered the river, the storm, and the strong arms of the man who had pulled her from danger as vividly as if it had happened yesterday. As a child, Ayana often told herself that she was brave that day, but deep down she knew it was the cowboy's courage and kindness that had kept her alive. Bear, she thought about him often, imagining his strong hands, steady voice, and the calm that had somehow made her feel safe in a moment of terror.
Even as she grew into a young woman, that memory stayed with her, like a quiet, guiding light.
She would sometimes wander near the same riverbank, now calm and serene, and remember the fear she had felt, and the safety that had followed. Life moved on, as it always does. Ayana's childhood was not without challenges. Her family had their struggles, and she sometimes felt different from the other children. But through it all, she carried the memory of the cowboy's bravery as a source of comfort.
It reminded her that people could be kind and strong, even when the world seemed cruel or uncertain.
She studied hard in school, always curious about the world beyond the plains, and dreamed of traveling, learning, and making a life that mattered. Meanwhile, Daniel, the cowboy, also moved through the years with a mixture of work, responsibility, and quiet reflection. He grew older, as everyone does, and the ranch remained his constant companion. Every morning he rose before sunrise to tend the animals, repair fences, and ensure the land stayed healthy. The work was demanding, but it grounded him. In the evenings, when the chores were done, he would sit on the porch of his small ranch house, watching the sun sink behind the hills, and think about the people whose lives he had touched over the years. Among those thoughts, the memory of the little girl by the river never left him. It was strange, he sometimes thought, how one single moment could leave such a lasting impression. He had saved many people in his life, some with simple acts of help, others in moments of danger. But the image of Ayana, drenched and shivering, looking up at him with fear and trust in her eyes, stayed with him more than anything else. He wondered what had become of her, whether she had grown up strong and happy, and whether she even remembered him at all. For both of them, life carried on, shaped by ordinary routines and extraordinary memories. Ayana eventually moved away from the family home to attend school in a nearby town. She discovered a world beyond the plains, full of new ideas, new challenges, and new people. But even in the bustling halls of the school and the noisy streets of the town, the memory of that one day, the day she had been saved from the river, remained vivid. It was not just a memory of fear, but of a strange, comforting bond that she could not explain. Over the years, she thought about Daniel often, not just as the man who had saved her life, but as someone who had believed in her courage and had treated her with kindness and respect when she had felt powerless. That thought became a kind of guiding principle in her life.
She realized that small acts of kindness could have enormous effects, shaping the futures of those who receive them.
Inspired by this, she began helping others in her own way, small gestures that made a difference, whether it was helping a classmate, volunteering in her community, or standing up for someone who could not stand up for themselves. Meanwhile, Daniel faced his own challenges. Life on the ranch was not easy. Weather, financial struggles, and the demands of running a large property often tested his patience and strength. He also experienced loss, friends who had moved away, neighbors who had passed, and moments of loneliness that crept in when the work was done and the day ended. Despite it all, he never lost his sense of purpose. The memory of rescuing Ayana reminded him why he had chosen a life of service and responsibility. It reminded him that courage and kindness could have lasting effects, sometimes in ways one could not immediately see. One day, as Ayana finished her studies and prepared to step into the wider world, she found herself thinking more and more about Daniel. She realized that the gratitude she had felt as a child had grown into something deeper, something she could not easily define. First, she remembered the way he had looked at her that day by the river, the care in his eyes and the strength in his voice. She knew that she wanted to see him again, not just to thank him, but to understand the bond that had been formed all those years ago. It took courage for her to decide to return to the plains. The memory of the river, the storm, and the cowboy's rescue had been a constant companion, but returning after 20 years felt like stepping into a dream. She packed her bags, said goodbye to the life she had built in the town, and set off toward the ranch where it all had begun. Every mile brought back memories of that fateful day, the sound of rushing water, the roar of the storm, and the quiet, steady reassurance of the man who had saved her life.
Daniel, on the other hand, was unaware that this moment of reunion was approaching.
Life had continued in its steady rhythm. He tended to the cattle, repaired fences, and occasionally helped neighbors with small emergencies, never imagining that the little girl from the river would one day come back into his life. Yet, in quiet moments, he often thought of her. He wondered if she had grown up happy, if she remembered him, and if she had carried forward the courage that he had seen in her that stormy day. As the day approached when their paths would cross again, both of them felt a mixture of anticipation and uncertainty, though neither realized it yet. Ayana, now a confident young woman, was nervous as she approached the familiar plains, wondering if Daniel would even remember her, or if the man she remembered would still exist in the same way. Daniel, unaware of her return, continued his work. But there was a quiet space in his heart reserved for the memory of that day by the river, a space that seemed to have been waiting for her all along. The plain seemed unchanged after 20 years. The river still ran through the land, calm and serene compared to the raging waters of that stormy day. The barn stood sturdy and familiar, a place that had weathered storms, heat, and time. It was as if the land itself had been waiting for their reunion, a silent witness to a bond that had begun long ago. For Ayana, returning was both a journey through memory and a step into the unknown. She carried with her gratitude, respect, and a quiet hope. The hope that Daniel would remember her, that he would recognize the bond they had formed, and that perhaps, after all these years, their connection could be renewed in ways neither of them had imagined. And for Daniel, though he did not yet know it, the arrival of that young woman, grown, confident, and carrying the memory of that day, would stir emotions he had long kept in check. It would remind him of the courage, trust, and connection that had existed in the simplest of moments, and it would challenge him to confront feelings he had never dared to express.
20 years had passed since the storm, the river, and the rescue.
20 years had shaped both of them in countless ways. But the bond that began on that stormy afternoon remained unbroken. It had been a silent thread connecting their lives, carrying the weight of gratitude, trust, and a quiet, unspoken understanding. Now, as fate would have it, that thread was about to pull them together once more, setting the stage for a reunion neither could forget and a story that would continue in ways they had never imagined. In those moments, as Ayana drew closer to the ranch, memories and emotions intertwined. The past was not gone. It lived in every step she took, every thought of that day, and every hope for what was to come. And though Daniel had no way of knowing she was near, the plains themselves seemed to hum with the anticipation of the moment when the little girl he had saved would return to his life, grown and ready to reconnect with the man who had once been her protector. It was a story of patience, courage, and the enduring power of kindness. A story that proved how a single act, done without thought of reward, could ripple through time and shape lives in ways unimaginable. And as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the familiar landscape,
Ayana stepped closer to the ranch, ready to see the man who had saved her, ready to honor the bond that had begun 20 years ago.
And ready to take the first step toward a new chapter in a story that had begun on the banks of a stormy river. The sun was just beginning to sink behind the rolling hills when Ayana finally arrived at the ranch. The familiar sight of the barn, the wide fields, and the river glinting in the late afternoon light made her heart beat faster. 20 years had passed since that stormy day, yet the land looked much the same, as if time had been careful not to erase the memory of what had happened there. She took a deep breath, steadying her nerves, and reminded herself why she had come. She had come to thank the man who had saved her life all those years ago. But as she walked closer, she realized her feelings were more complicated than simple gratitude. She had thought about this reunion for so long, how it might feel to see him again, how he would react, whether he would even remember her. Now, standing at the edge of the property, the fear and excitement mingled in her chest like the wind before a storm. Daniel was in the barn, finishing his evening chores. He had just let the last of the cattle into the pen and was wiping his hands on a rag when he heard the crunch of boots on gravel. He looked up instinctively. At first he saw a figure in the distance and assumed it was a neighbor or perhaps someone lost in the fields. But as the figure approached, something about her made him pause. It was a young woman now, grown and confident, but there was a familiarity in her posture, in the way she moved, that tugged at something deep inside him. He straightened, squinting against the setting sun, trying to place where he had seen her before. Ayana stopped a few feet from him, her eyes fixed on his, and for a long moment neither spoke. The air between them seemed heavy, filled with unspoken questions and memories too big for words. Finally, Ayana took a small step forward and spoke, her voice steady but soft. "Do you remember me?" she asked.
I'm the little girl you saved from the river 20 years ago." Daniel froze.
His mind raced, flipping through memories he had not touched in years. The storm. River. The terrified little girl clinging to the log, a small wet hand in his. And then the fear that had given way to relief, and the gratitude he had seen in her eyes. Slowly, recognition dawned, and his eyes widened.
Ayana?
He asked, his voice catching slightly. "Is it really you?" She nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Yes, it's me. I never forgot what you did for me." Bay. Daniel stepped closer, his heart pounding. He could see how much she had grown, how strong and confident she had become, and yet there was a hint of the same child he had saved in her eyes. The trust, the courage, the quiet strength. Bay. I remember," he said finally, his voice low and full of emotion. "I've thought about you many times. I wondered what became of you, if you were safe, if you were happy." Ayana's eyes glistened with unshed tears.
I am happy, she said. But I had to come back.
I had to see you again, not just to thank you.
But because I wanted you to know how much that day meant to me, and how it shaped my life.
Daniel felt a lump in his throat.
He had never imagined that the memory of one act could mean so much to someone else, that it could echo through years and shape a life. He reached out slowly, almost afraid to touch her after all this time, but she stepped closer, letting him hold her hands in his. The connection was immediate, electric, and filled with unspoken understanding. They began to walk slowly around the ranch, talking about the years that had passed. Ayana told him about her life, the school she had attended, the friends she had made, and the small ways she had tried to help others, inspired by his kindness. Daniel listened, amazed at how thoughtful, strong, and independent she had become. He realized that the little girl he had saved had grown into someone remarkable, someone who carried courage and kindness as naturally as breathing. As they walked, the memories of the storm came flooding back. Daniel remembered the fear in her eyes, the river threatening to sweep her away, and the relief he had felt when he had finally pulled her to safety. Ayana remembered the same things, the cold water, the terror, and the strange comfort she had felt in his presence. Talking about that day, they laughed quietly at small details. But there was also a deep reverence in their voices, a shared understanding of how that moment had changed both their lives forever. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the fields. Daniel led her to the riverbank where it had all happened. The river was calm now, gentle and unthreatening, but it had once been a roaring force that could have taken her away. They stood together, looking at the water, and for a moment neither spoke. It was as if the land itself was remembering, bearing witness to the bond that had begun 20 years ago. Ayana finally broke the silence. "I never imagined I would see you again," she said softly. "But now that I have, I feel like I need to tell you something else." She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the ground for a moment before she met his eyes again.
I want to marry you.
Daniel's breath caught. He had not expected this. The idea was startling, yet somehow not entirely unbelievable. The bond they shared, the trust, the gratitude, and the memory of that day had grown into something deeper than either had realized. Bah! His mind raced, trying to reconcile the past with the present, the little girl he had saved with the confident woman standing before him. He took a step closer, gently holding her hands again. Ayana, I don't know what to say, he admitted. I never imagined that you would feel this way.
She smiled softly, a mixture of hope and nervousness.
I know it's unexpected, she said, but I couldn't leave without telling you.
You saved my life once. That day changed me in ways I can't fully explain. Despot. And now, I want to spend my life with you. I want to honor the bond we have, the trust, the courage, and the kindness that brought us together. Daniel felt a swell of emotion he could hardly contain. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just the young woman she had become, but the little girl who had trusted him completely, without question, in the midst of fear. He realized that the connection he felt now had been there all along, waiting for the right moment to grow into something deeper, something more profound than he had dared to imagine. He knelt down slightly, still holding her hands, and said, Ayana, I don't know what the future holds, but I do know this. I've never forgotten you. I've never forgotten that day or the courage you showed. And now, seeing you again, I feel something I can't explain. Something I've been holding on to all these years.
Tears welled up in her eyes as she nodded. I feel the same, she whispered.
Bess.
All these years I've carried the memory of that day and of you. And now I want us to have a future together.
They stood there by the river, the wind rustling the grass, the water flowing gently at their feet. For a long moment time seemed to pause, as if the land itself was witnessing their reunion, recognizing the bond that had survived 20 years of separation. It was not just a reunion of two people. It was a reunion of trust, courage, and unspoken love that had waited patiently for the right moment.
Daniel finally spoke, his voice steady but full of emotion.
Ayana, if you truly feel this way, then I want to honor it.
I want to see where this bond takes us. I want to build a life with you, together. Her eyes filled with tears, and she smiled, a radiant expression that lit up the evening.
Yes, she said softly.
Together. They walked back toward the ranch, hand in hand, sharing stories, laughter, and memories. The sun had set completely, leaving a golden glow over the fields and the barn. The air was filled with the quiet hum of nature, the sound of the river, and the gentle rustling of the wind through the grass. For both of them, it felt like the world had paused to make space for this moment, a moment they had both waited for without fully knowing it. As they reached the porch of the ranch house, Daniel turned to her. I never imagined this day would come, he said. And yet, here we are. Ayana nodded, leaning slightly against him.
Sometimes life works in mysterious ways, she said softly. Sometimes it takes years for people to find each other, even when the connection was always there. He
had saved her once, but now it felt as if she had saved him too, in ways that words could not describe. Together they looked out at the fields, the barn, and the river, knowing that the past had brought them here, and that the future was waiting for them to step into it, together. And for the first time in many years, both of them felt completely at peace. The little girl by the river and the young cowboy had reunited, and now, as adults, they were ready to turn the bond that had begun in fear and courage into something beautiful, lasting, and full of love. The days that followed the reunion were filled with quiet joy and a sense of wonder. Daniel and Ayanna spent long hours talking, walking the fields, and remembering the past while sharing dreams for the future. Every word, every laugh, every touch felt meaningful, as if the years apart had been preparing them for this very moment. It was a connection that neither could explain fully, yet both felt in the depths of their hearts. A bond formed in courage, trust, and gratitude that had grown into something more beautiful over time. The ranch, which had always been Daniel's home and life, now felt alive in a new way. Ayanna was not just a visitor. She belonged here, as if the land itself had been waiting for her return. She learned the routines of the ranch, helping feed the animals, repair fences, and care for the fields. Daniel showed her the paths he walked every day, the hidden spots where wildflowers grew, and the quiet banks of the river where the storm had once raged.
Each moment strengthened their bond, blending the past with the present and creating memories that were theirs alone.
As the days passed, the idea of marriage became more real. It wasn't just a promise or a formality. It was the natural step for two lives that had been intertwined long before either of them had fully understood it. Ayanna spoke gently about her feelings, expressing her desire to honor the bond that had begun 20 years ago.
I want our lives to be connected, she said softly one evening as they watched the sun sink behind the hills.
Not just as friends or as people who care about each other, but as partners, sharing everything from this day forward.
Daniel felt the truth of her words in every fiber of his being. He remembered the little girl by the river, the fear in her eyes, the trust she had shown him, and now he saw that same trust and courage reflected in the woman before him.
Ayanna, he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. I've never stopped thinking about you, not for a day. And now, having you here, having you in my life, I realize that my heart has been waiting for this moment too. I want to share my life with you, if you'll let me. Tears glistened in her eyes as she smiled.
Yes, Daniel.
I want that too, she whispered. The wedding was a quiet, intimate affair held on the ranch in a small clearing near the river. Only family, close friends, and neighbors attended, but the atmosphere was filled with love, joy, and the sense that something extraordinary was happening. The sun cast a warm glow over the gathering, and a gentle breeze rustled the grass as Daniel and Ayanna stood together, hands intertwined, ready to take the next step in their journey. As they exchanged vows, Daniel reflected on the journey that had brought them here. He remembered the storm, the fear, the rescue, and the trust that had been placed in him that day. He thought about the years apart, the life he had built, and the unexpected way that fate had brought them together again. Now, as he looked into Ayanna's eyes, he felt a sense of completeness he had never known before. Ayanna spoke with a calm confidence, her voice filled with emotion.
Daniel, you saved my life when I was just a child.
You gave me courage, safety, and hope when I needed it most. And now, as an adult, I want to spend my life with you, sharing every moment, every joy, and every challenge. I promise to stand by you, to support you, and to love you always. Daniel smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and love. Ayanna, you have given me more than I can ever express. You have reminded me of the beauty of trust, the strength of courage, and the power of kindness. I promise to honor you, to support you, and to love you with all my heart for all my days." The ceremony was simple but perfect. The river flowed gently in the background. The wind carried the scent of wildflowers, and the sun dipped low, casting a golden glow over the ranch. Friends and family watched with warm smiles, touched by the story of a bond that had begun decades ago and had now blossomed into love. After the ceremony, Daniel and Ayana walked together along the riverbank, hand in hand. The water sparkled in the fading light, reflecting the joy and peace that filled their hearts. They spoke softly about the future, about the life they wanted to build together, and about the dreams they hoped to achieve. Every word was filled with hope, love, and a sense of shared purpose. They decided to make the ranch their home, blending their lives with the land that had witnessed their journey. Ayana brought her own ideas and energy, helping with the animals, the fields, and even planting a small garden where she could grow flowers and vegetables. Daniel, who had always been independent and self-reliant, found joy in sharing the work and the responsibilities with someone he loved deeply. Together, they transformed the ranch into a place of harmony, warmth, and growth. Over time, their love continued to deepen. They celebrated small victories, faced challenges together, and supported each other through every twist of life. The bond that had begun in a single act of courage grew stronger with each passing day, rooted in trust, kindness, and the shared understanding that they had been brought together for a reason. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set behind the hills, Daniel took Ayana's hand and smiled. "Do you remember that stormy day by the river?" he asked gently.
Ayana nodded, a soft smile on her lips. "I remember it clearly," she said.
Rust. "It feels like it happened yesterday, and yet it feels like it was always meant to happen." Daniel squeezed her hand. "That day changed both of us," he said. "You reminded me of what it means to care for someone, to be brave, and to trust against it. I think our lives were meant to meet again, to create something beautiful together." Ayana leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder. "I feel the same way," she whispered. "All these years I carried that memory with me, and now, having you here, I feel like we can face anything together."
The seasons changed and life on the ranch moved forward.
Bess. Spring brought new growth. Summer brought long days of work and laughter. Autumn painted the fields in gold and red, and winter blanketed the land in quiet, reflective beauty. Through it all, Daniel and Ayana grew together, their love deepening with every passing day. They laughed, they worked, they celebrated, and they faced challenges with the strength of a bond that had been formed in courage and trust decades ago. Their story became a quiet legend in the town. A tale of a cowboy who had saved a little Apache girl and a bond that had endured the test of time. Friends and neighbors often remarked on the strength of their connection, on the way they cared for each other, and on the peace and happiness that seemed to radiate from the ranch. But for Daniel and Ayana, the story was theirs alone. A story of bravery, gratitude, love, and the beauty of lives intertwined by fate and kindness. One afternoon, as they walked along the riverbank where it all had begun, Ayana paused and looked at Daniel. "Do you ever think about that day?" she asked softly. Daniel smiled, taking her hand. "Every day," he said. "It's a memory I will carry for the rest of my life. And now, it's also the beginning of our story together, a story I never want to end." Ayana smiled, leaning into him. "Neither do I," she whispered. "It feels like we were meant to find each other again, and now We can build our life together, just as it was always meant to be. As the sun set, casting a warm golden glow over the plains, the couple stood together hand in hand, hearts full of gratitude and love. The river flowed gently beside them. The wind whispered through the trees, and the ranch stood quietly, a witness to a bond that had survived time, distance, and the challenges of life. Daniel and Ayana knew that the past had shaped them, that their memories and experiences had brought them to this moment. And as they looked into each other's eyes, they understood that their love was not just a product of time, but a reflection of courage, trust, and the enduring power of kindness.
They walked back to the ranch together, ready to face the future side by side.
Inspiration. Their story, beginning with a storm, a river, and an act of bravery, had reached a new chapter, one filled with hope, love, and the promise of a lifetime together.
And as night fell over the plains, they knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them as one, guided by the bond that had started 20 years ago and had grown into something beautiful, lasting, and eternal.